Hello, welcome back. Last video, we discussed some methods that you could use in your evaluation that are not surveys. In this video, we're going to talk about the different ways that you could administer and use surveys, the pros and cons of surveys. It's a very useful tool, widely relied upon in extension, and we'll talk about some best practices to maximize the success of your surveys. Many different types that you might have experienced in your lives. Just to talk about 6 quickly. Mail surveys, not used quite as much as they used to be anymore, but since you're doing a paper survey and you're sending it out via mail, hoping that folks fill it back and fill it out and send it back to you. Again, we have other techniques that are better, but there might be a situation where this is necessary. Perhaps you have a community that isn't on the internet or doesn't have access to the internet or telephones, and you would like to survey them. Mail could be a good option. Maybe you have a mailing list, you have addresses, you have names, you have those kind of things. Then mail might be the way for you. Telephone surveys, really great way to talk to folks and ask them direct questions and get answers to those items. Again, we use it a lot to reach communities that maybe we don't know, right? So you could pay companies to do telephone surveys for you. You could have a list of phone numbers, maybe from your 4-H club, that you could call and ask questions with over the phone. Face-to-face, always the classic way of doing things. Let's say you're doing a program at a farmer's market, and you have a team of people that you send around with clipboards and paper surveys. And you're talking to them face-to-face, and you are asking them questions and writing those down, right? So very similar to telephone, very similar to pencil and paper, but instead of them filling it out, you're the one filling it out. Pencil and paper surveys will always have a place in extension. Again, if you are an ag educator, maybe you're presenting to a group of Amish farmers, using pencil and paper might be the way to go. Or you are out in a field, you don't have internet access, you might hand out pencil and paper, having people fill these things out by hand. The most common way that we do surveys is definitely online now. As you hopefully know, you have access to Qualtrics, which is our platform for creating surveys that can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. And again, this idea of mixed mode or mixed method surveys. So taking any of the previous 5 and combining them in whatever way is helpful. So for example, if you have a mailing list, but you want to do an online survey. So maybe you mail out a postcard. On that postcard is a QR code that they then scan with their phone to take an online survey, right? So you're mixing your methods a little bit to get the best results. All right, so you have all these options open to you. How do you know which type to use? So first, knowing your deadline is going to help. If you have 6 months to get responses back, then mailing them might actually be a good viable option. If you have 6 days, that obviously is not going to work, and you might have to use something else. What is your budget? Do you have a budget for things like incentives or to pay for responses? If you don't, then reaching out to strangers might not be very successful. If you're reaching out to an internal audience, again, like 4-H families, you might not need incentives. What is your audience? What is their general age, language skills, technology comforts, their trust level with you? Do they know you? Do they not know you? These things are going to play a role in which type that you decide to use. And then finally, how simple or complicated is your survey? If it's a simple survey, then putting it on paper seems a pretty good idea. If it's very complicated, with lots of skips and branches and questions that rely on responses from other questions, you might not be able to do that on paper very well, and you might have to do it, let's say, in an online setting. All right, let's talk briefly about some advantages and disadvantages of surveys. We use them a lot because they are great at getting information from an audience, and they're really, really good for quantitative measures. So using things like 5-point scales, yes and no questions, we get a lot of really good quantitative data very quickly. Drawbacks are that it really, your data, your results are only as good as your survey is going to be, right? So taking the time to write your items correctly, write your questions correctly, and get to what you're asking for is going to be a good way to maximize your success. If you're looking for really in-depth, detailed insight, these might not be for you. Things like focus groups and interviews might be the way to do that. They can be resource intensive, especially if you are calling or mailing. These things require time and money to do properly. Depending on who your audience is and how well they know you, your response rates could be pretty low. If you're sending out a mailing to 1,000 anonymous people who have never heard of you, I wouldn't expect too much of a response rate. If you're sending a survey to 40 farmers who came to a multi-session series that you did for them, you could get a pretty high response rate because they know you and trust you. You're also going to be looking at some incomplete data. So somebody might fill out the first couple of questions and then say, you know what, I'm done with this, I got to run. And the rest of your survey is blank. So what do you do with that? All right, overcoming these challenges that we talked about. If you're able to, whenever you can introduce some kind of incentive to complete a survey, you always are going to be better off. These are things like we mentioned earlier, perhaps gift cards or the chance to get entered into a drawing for some kind of a prize. Having good instructions is critical. You really need to explain what is about to happen, what the survey is for, what you're looking for, flip the page over. Any instructions that are required, you need to lay out in detail. If your question has any kind of doubt about how to answer it, there's any kind of ambiguity in your question, you're going to have some problems because people are going to be questioning about what it is that you mean, and they're going to be unsure about how to answer. And again, a really great way to maximize your response rate is having multiple points of contact. So ideally what you might do is, if it's an online survey, send an email out to people who are going to get it and say, hey, heads up, tomorrow at noon, you'll get a survey from me. So please look for that. After a week or so, maybe send a reminder. Hey, you haven't filled this out yet. Please do that for me. And then once they do complete it, sending a thank you note. Thanks for doing that. We really, it means a lot to Extension, and it helps us with our programming. All right. So again, to revisit our narrative here, right? Measures are tied to objectives, which are developed during the logic model process, right? Once we've established those objectives, we need the right questions to gather evidence. So we're writing questions to gather evidence that you can find in our indicators. So if we're talking about the number of people who adopted a certain behavior, we need to ask specifically about that behavior, right? If we're teaching about spotted lanternfly identification of, eggs and larvae and adults, then we need to specifically ask about those things. There is a lot of literature and a lot of books about writing good questions. We'll not get into that today, but just some basic parameters are that a good question provides answers that really gets you the information that is meaningful and is what you're looking to describe in your program, right? We're also looking for comparable information. So maybe you have a program that serves 1,000 people and you're going to survey 100 of those people. You need to make sure that your survey is written in a way that you can generalize those findings to the rest of the population. Having your objectives, a few steps ago, having clear objectives really helps to lead to clear questions. So for example, if you have an objective that is a little bit soft and isn't smart, you're going to have not smart and pretty soft questions. You need to have smart objectives, and you need to have questions that are tied to those objectives to get to what it is that you're looking for. And then finally, clear questions. Questions cannot be long, they cannot be double-barreled, they cannot be ambiguous. They need to be succinct and tight and directed toward what it is that you're asking. Two main types of questions: close-ended, which are often thought of as more quantitative in nature. So there's a structure there, right? You're giving them options, you're giving them choices. So checklists, true-false questions, 5-point scales about attitude or satisfaction or frequency. Conversely, open-ended questions can ask them broad questions and or thought it was more qualitative in nature. So what went well today? What could be improved in this program? What did you think about the new system for registering for programs? Those open-ended things can give you some more information. Some examples. Instead of saying, but you could say, how was your day at school? And then provide, I don't know, a 5-point scale from bad to excellent, right? Or you could say something about, tell me about your day at school, and have an open text box and people can write some things there. Did you have a good day at work? Yes, no, maybe, right? Or you could say, tell me about the best part of your workday. Tell me about the worst part of your workday. Those kind of things. Different types of questions, different types of data. And then finally, close-end items are what we use the most in extension. And there are a few kind of tried and true ways to do that. So Likert scale, probably far and away the most common type of item that we have in extension, surveys for evaluation. So things like agreement scales, satisfaction scales, you've seen them, you've filled them out yourself, you know what they are. Some ordered responses, so responses that go from low to high, for example. So things like age ranges, right? There's a direction. Responses that are unordered, so demographic categories, for example, right? There's no order from lowest to highest or best to worst. They are just categories that collect categorical data. And then finally, it's always great to include some kind of other choice in case your choices don't provide all the options possible. So you need to have an exhaustive list of all the possible opportunities for people to answer truthfully.